Mr. Mooney, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Sorry, we can't hear you. I'm gonna have to solve this first.
Okay.
Ok. Está en este, sí. So,
Better.
yay, yeah. Wait, we can hear you now.
You can?
Yeah, now we can hear you. Can you
Okay,
hear us?
great. Sí,
Muy bien.
perfecto.
Welcome to this season's foro. We're very thankful for you to have accepted our invitation
My
to
pleasure.
share with us a little bit of your dissertation for your doctoral degree
Hmm.
about Joe Pass. Do you want to share some presentation, or you want to make it?
We could just, I figured I would just talk about it
Yeah,
if we
I was
have the
thinking.
text. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're we are streaming on Facebook.
Okay.
Actually, the reason I ask you because about this is because I think not so many people knows about how much Joe Pass works actually are, like
Hmm.
any of us actually are just pretty familiar with his work about virtuoso records,
Of course. Yeah.
and but I was reading when it came to me all of these other works that I didn't know, and
Yeah.
which are very important, and many things that normally well, I haven't seen in any other works actually. So I wanted to ask you about that.
Hmm.
What was your process for your to having this work done, and if you could talk about, I made a few appointments about this, the historical approach, and how
Hmm.
did you go with the testimonies, the people you interviewed, and a lot of things you made clear there that I didn't actually know at all, which what were the types of guitars he played.
Hmm.
I just have this picture of Joe Pass, bald and
Yeah.
with his Gibson, and
That's the image. That image was very carefully put together of him, as far as I could tell, by Norman Granz. And that's what we think with the cigar and the bald and the mustache and the bald head. And
yeah, yeah. Nobody knows the other.
yeah, there was a whole other period. I guess I'll start by saying, and I hope it's okay, English.
Sure.
That's all I got for you. But
Yeah.
so just a little introduction to why I did this particular topic. I mean, this was for my PhD at New York University. That I was there from 2011 to, I think I got the thing finally in 2015 or 2016. And for anyone out there that's thinking of doing this type of research or has done it, I think it's really important to pick a topic that's something you really love and you're really fascinated by, because the amount of time and energy that goes into it is really massive. And so for me, the reason I picked this topic specifically is because growing up in New Orleans and studying jazz guitar, great, the dog's barking, excuse me, um, with a guy named Hank Mackey and Steve Mazikowski, the Joe Pass records of the early 1960s, particularly For Django, Catch Me, Sounds of Synanon, I guess Joy Spring didn't come out till later, which is I talk about in the dissertation, but those records were a really big influence on them. And there was this story that I grew up with, this sort of myth that Steve Mazikowski, when he was a teenager, Hank Mackey, his teacher, and later my teacher, had given him uh, the record for Django, let him borrow it, or the story changes in different tellings, but either it was Catch Me and For Django, or it was one or the other. And apparently the story goes that he took those records into his basement and figured out like everything on them as a teenager, and then brought those back to Hank, that material back to Hank, and said, explain to me, why does he do this here? And Hank would tell us all this story. And so it was like this myth of like, oh my God, Steve did this. And so I grew up with that I don't know if it's a myth, it's probably true. It's at least partially true. And so when I was thinking, I was like, you know what, I'm going to transcribe even more. I'm going to do all three of these records from my dissertation. I mean, I had this connection to it. Also, that particular period of Joe Pass, as you said, isn't known even to jazz guitar players. When you talk about, Virtuoso came out in 1973. And then Joe Pass was with Norman Granz, and he was with Ella Fitzgerald and Oscar Peterson, and they did all these records for Pablo. Those are the ones that we know, and that's the image of Joe Pass that we all have, sonically. And also, it was a very carefully cultivated, tailored with the suits and the liner notes of those albums. And even the decision to have him be the solo guitar guy, that was not something that really was happening that much before Virtuoso. So the basis of the way I play and a lot of the New Orleans jazz guitar style from Hank Mackey and Steve Mazikowski and other students like Teddy Ludwig, the late Todd Duke, Matt Johnson, all my contemporaries. For Django was it. That's like the Bible of how to play jazz guitar. Is that album. And then I would talk to other guitar players, and I realized like nobody had heard it. So part of this dissertation was the first part, which is like kind of a history of the Joe Pass in the 1960s. I mean, I start with sort of like what his background and what he was doing, before the 60s, and then he started recording. And I got, I was looking through this thing, I wrote this, I finished it in 2015, and I kind of put it away after that. And I've gone back to it a little bit, but just today, and yesterday I was going through it again, knowing I was going to have to do this thing. And it's really pretty massive. I went through, I tried to cover a lot of material. And yeah, it's like 550 pages. It include all the transcriptions. But yeah, the first part was a history to a certain extent. Everything that he was doing in the 60s, all the records that he played on. I tried to find some of the stuff. It's difficult to nail down with certainty, like what guitar was he using on this, because there's no actual documentation. There's pictures, photographs. You can be like, oh, what's that guitar? Who's that session? Okay, look who was on piano. That must be this. It's either this record or this record, and he's got a 335. Oh, wow, I didn't know he played a 335. What amp was it? Okay, here's an ashtray on an amp that's not a cabinet. And what amp could that have been? What amp were they using at that time in California in 1964? And then you sort of suss it out and do a little investigation. And I don't know that I'm 100% sure about every conclusion I made, but I wanted to know like why those albums sounded the way they did. And to a lesser extent, I think everybody knows what Virtuoso sounds like in those later things. But I wanted to know why. One, why does nobody know those records? Two, why do they sound so good? And what is it that makes it so compelling to me, his playing in that period? And that from there, that was the basis of the research and how I got into it.
Yeah, but as you say, these records, nobody knows them. And also, like, I think there were other aspects about it, like also the producers that he had on each record label. Like there's this guy, he was like, I don't know if it was Pablo Records or the one before. So this person, he had this power of decision that he could just cut the tapes wherever he wanted, and he could just mix like take one with take three.
Oh yeah.
And actually Joe Pass wasn't even, I mean, he didn't care also. I mean,
no,
about the final product, like and the final product could have been like a part where the drums solo would have been taken for the from
Yeah.
the take five, and the theme from the take one, and this guy will make just arbitrary decisions about the production of this sound in the end
Mhm.
product. No, that's really, I mean, I never heard about that. And
Mhm.
of course, people talk about it maybe when between them, but nobody really knows about that in the end.
Yeah, they were saying like, for Django, which to me is really the masterpiece. I was talking to, some years ago, the people that were on it, the bass player, Jim Huard and John Pisano. And I didn't get to talk to Colin Bailey, who's the drummer. But yeah, they were saying that they were kind of shocked when they finally heard it because, they would do splicing, manual splicing of different takes. And they would usually do it during drum solos or if they were trading, because then they got kind of a clean place to do it. But there's definitely a few moments. I think those guys noticed it more than I did. I noticed it on Catch Me, which is kind of wacky sounding. But there's definitely some like there's a one thing that I never quite figured out, and I tried to talk to those guys about it, is the version of Night and Day that they do on For Django has this magical ending. I don't know how, it's almost like an impossible ending, and I think it must have been like some splicing that went on. But it's funny because to me, the sound of the albums in the 60s sounded so much better than the ones in the 70s. And by better, I mean like warmer, like more reverb, more attention to the sound of his guitar. And they just sound really good. Even the maybe Catch Me is a little sketchy, but that was his first one. But For Django, and also like the commercial ones that they did after that. So basically, the record label is Pacific Jazz, and Richard Bach is the guy that we're talking about, the producer. And he also, I guess he's most famous for putting together like the Chet Baker, what's his name, Jerry Mulligan band, that famous band in the early 50s. And that's kind of how he, I think, was able to establish himself. And he did a lot of stuff on that label, including the Joe Pass records. And then he also, in the mid 60s, there was a series of albums they did that were, I think, trying to be really commercial. There's one called Sign of the Times. And I actually love these records. Like Chet Baker's on it, and they have like vocals, and they're playing pop tunes. Like he's playing Nowhere Man from the Beatles and like Burt Bacharach songs. But then there'll be some jazz soloing too. So it's definitely like a commercial attempt. And then there's one where he plays Rolling Stones songs called Stones Jazz from like 1966. That's really good. And there's one, the weirdest one is called 12-string movie themes, where he's playing 12-string guitar and he's just playing the themes of like Lawrence of Arabia and these movies from the 60s. And it's really kind of bizarre. And so they were trying different things, and I'm kind of jumping around a lot in the story, but those records were trying. I make this distinction or this observation in the dissertation too. That's interesting. So they're trying to make these jazz records that to me are really great jazz albums. For Django, Joy Spring, the live record that they didn't even release until the 80s, and Catch Me. And they weren't commercially successful jazz records. So then they tried to make commercial records that were also not successful. And they're kind of goofy because they weren't made to necessarily with the same artistic goals in mind. And, Joe Pass, he spent the 60s. I have a section in the book talking about he played in the studios, and I talked to a colleague of his named Mike Anthony who, did like 1960s studio sessions with Joe Pass, and Barney Kessel was doing this too at the time. Tommy Tedesco, the famous Wrecking Crew. This was the golden era of studio playing in the 60s, and Joe Pass did a little of that. He toured with different people. He toured with George Shearing. He made a bunch of records on that Pacific label with like Gerald Wilson and Les McCann, and just a lot of stuff that I tried to track down with the help of this discography that I found online. A great Oishi, I have to look up his first name, but a great Japanese discographer who went through and found like every record that Joe Pass played on for his whole life. Or at least, I mean, I can't imagine doing more work than he did. So I already had that, but one chapter in the book is me just going through and actually listening to all the things. I was able to track them all down, and it's some really great playing of Joe Pass's in the 60s that, again, like nobody knows because we only know Virtuoso.
Yeah. And
And
also all these, he was a session musician, like, and he actually, from your work, I learned that he played uh, on this pop records,
yeah,
like
50
he was playing,
guitars.
yeah, all right, like Telecasters guitars and what was this bands he was playing with, like, uh,
It's just session work. I mean, I got to
session-
go through. I made some notes,
yeah,
about when he was. There was some of these dates that Mike Anthony told me about. There was these series of records in the '60s. I guess it was called kind of like mood music.
yeah,
One thing was like the 50 guitars of. It was a whole series of records, and there's like the 50 guitars play Italian, the
yeah,
50 guitars play Brazilian, and it was not 50 guitars, but basically they would track together a bunch of guitar players. Sometimes just like strumming along. It was very sort of background music. And I remember Mike Anthony was like, "Yeah, I think I must have met Joe on a 50 guitars date." And I was like, "What? 50
oh,
guitars?" And it's just all these records that they made back then. I mean, and you can look on Joe Pass. He wasn't as involved as some other people. Like he wasn't like Tommy Tedesco or some of the. I think even Barney Kessel is credited on a lot of records, like
yeah,
Sonny Bono. The Beat Goes On. He's on that, and he's on Van Morrison, Astral Weeks. You could see him credited, and the Beach Boys, Pet Sounds. You don't see Joe Pass's name as much because I think he was on and off the road too at the time, but he was definitely that was part of what he was actually doing in the 60s, or he was playing in the band on like different television shows and talk shows. There's a story that Wes Montgomery was a guest on one of the shows at the time in the 60s where you have a musical guest, and Joe Pass was in the like house band of the TV show, and Wes Montgomery's like, what, seeing Joe Pass there and knowing of his playing. So he did a lot of like sort of odd jobs in the 60s before he became, super famous. Uh-oh, what happened?
hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're just in the dark.
Oh, sorry, wait, can you hear me now?
Oh, I hear you, yeah.
Oh, great. Sorry, it's just we're having like electricity
Oh, man.
shut off, but I just connected to my phone so we can go on.
Hmm.
You're gonna you're not gonna see me. I mean, I think you can see me, like,
Yeah, I see you.
close.
You're just like a
Yeah, but
very
let,
Roberto.
let's see how it goes. So I think, yeah. So also this part of your work, that it was like also another revelation that he was he was playing on these records, and then also these guitars he used to play, like baritone guitars, and all these
Mhm.
and all these records that he was playing other things, acoustic guitars also,
Mhm.
no? It's
Yep.
yeah,
We were trying to figure out what he was playing, and it's funny because with a lot of guitar players that are famous, everybody knows their equipment. We kind of nerd out as guitar players on, oh, it's this type of guitar with this and this and this. But with Joe Pass, it's a little. I mean, I tracked it down in interviews. So the first couple records, he's playing like a Fender Jazzmaster or a Fender Jaguar, like the surf rock guitar, like the Kurt Cobain guitar.
oh,
He was
yeah,
playing that because he had just come from, he was living in a rehab center because in pretty much like in the 1950s, he was strung out on drugs and he was in and out of jail. And so he finally got in Los Angeles to the Synanon Rehab Center, and that was the guitar they had there. So he was just basically playing a borrowed guitar. And on the first record, Catch Me, that's what he's playing. For most of it, I wasn't quite sure because, again, you see photos from that time period and you see different guitars. Like I saw a 335, and there's a TV show that you can see on YouTube of him playing some of his best playing. Actually, he plays "The Song Is You," and he's playing that the Jaguar, the Jazzmaster. I have to look it up. I get them confused. They look so similar. And it wasn't until um, 64. He says that Joe Pass says that on his birthday, somebody like gave him the famous like the 175, the Gibson
Right.
175 that he's known
The
for.
one we all know. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the sound, you know. And but he also on that first record, there's some songs on acoustic, and it's really hard to tell what he's playing. And I remember Hank Mackey said that he thought it was you kind of just have to guess and think about what was available at the time. Hank Mackey said that he thought it was a Regal, which was like a Fender flat top guitar, but strung with nylon strings. So like a flat top with nylon strings. I was like, Hank, are you sure? He's like, yeah, that's what it was. I'm like, all right, you know, I don't know what it was, but it's a very interesting sounding instrument. Like it sounds kind of halfway between a classical and a steel string. And he was, you know, there, he plays that on Catch Me, and on there's some other sessions. Like there's a really cool version of Gerald Wilson, the big band, Gerald Wilson big band with Joe Pass featured on Round Midnight from like that same era, like 64, 65, where he's playing that acoustic and it's that same sound, but you know, it's not, we don't really know what it is. He didn't say anywhere. Like you can see pictures of it too sometimes, but you don't really get the whole thing. It definitely looks like a steel string, but then maybe it's got nylon strings on it. So it's very, and the six string, what he played on Catch Me, particularly, there are two takes of Catch Me. One of them is I think the Jaguar probably, and the other is the bass six. So it's a six string bass guitar.
Oh, yeah. Actually,
Like
I
what you
heard
hear.
about that because of your work. Also, I didn't know there was a bass guitar. I mean,
Ugh.
six strings, like, but there's something different. Like, there's this model that actually Fender still produces,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
it's
Glenn
absolutely
Campbell. If you hear like Wichita Lineman, you hear it a lot in like movie soundtracks. You
yeah.
hear it like Sergio Leone, you know, movies. You hear that. It's either that, I guess baritone guitar is a slightly different instrument, but I mean, I think the one Joe Pass was using on Catch Me is the six string, and he was just like shredding on it, you know,
Yeah.
playing
Yeah.
bebop.
Yeah. And also, there's also one part that I really like it also, because then you talk about his right hand technique.
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
I mean, of course, he was hybrid somehow, no, because he used on Virtuoso, of course, I think he uses mostly fingers, but I would think that before, but then uh, you talk a lot about his right hand technique and
Hmm.
all uh, this Italian
The
technique.
Italian downstroke. That's what Mike Anthony called it. It's funny, you know, Joe Pass actually used the same technique that like Django Reinhardt and the gypsy style guitarists did, where basically, although he doesn't sound really anything like them, but the idea that whenever you change strings, you use a down pick. So if you're on the same string, you alternate, but even if you're going from here this way, you go to another downstroke. And it's really kind of interesting because you know we think of the earlier players like Charlie Christian and Barney Kessel. They did mostly downstrokes, as many downstrokes as they could. Um, and of course, you know we have Wes Montgomery, a lot of hammer-ons and pull-offs. You know, some alternate picking with the thumb, but also a lot of down picks. And then you think about you know your Jimmy Rainey and your Tal Farlow and people like that, where there's a lot of alternate picking, but also a lot of hammer-ons and pull-offs. And then the Joe Pass school, and I think a lot of the other Italian people that came from it. And I think I tried to trace it back to the fact that, you know, the Italian American, you know, I think a lot of them were born in the States, but their parents were immigrants. And so a lot of the community, they were mandolin players and violin players, and they played like, they didn't just play guitar. And so some of the technique, I think, was adapted from mandolin and violin and things like that. And Joe Pass's first teacher was a guy who would come by and they would play, you know, he played mandolin, violin, and guitar. And it's definitely, and he also used his fingers a lot. And sometimes it's hard to tell, like on a record like Simplicity, that I don't talk that much about in the dissertation, but you know, these days I love that album so much. That's actually the one that I listen to probably more than any of the others. I think he plays with his fingers almost the whole record. And he was so, you can see when you see live concerts of him playing solo in the later, you know, in the 80s, and you know, he'll do one song with the pick, and it's usually kind of like you could tell that he sort of stopped using the pick because he's really his dexterity with the fingers is really amazing. The thumb and these fingers, kind of a classical technique, and it doesn't really slow him down much at all because he has great legato left hand, and you can hear it on the ballads on for Django, like Nuage and those tunes. You can hear the sound of the thumb. Really, I mean, it's kind of Wes like. I mean, just in the fact that he uses a lot of thumb, and then he can also really burn in that period with the pick, like with the up tempo stuff.
Yeah. Did you also try to learn that technique yourself? Like,
No, I mean, by the time, I mean, I played a lot of the solos. I mean, in my own playing, and again, this is why I did this dissertation as a performer. And the fact that the PhD I got was actually a performance PhD, which is sort of unusual. Usually you get your PhD in musicology, ethnomusicology theory, and then you get a DMA in the States, at least is what they call it, like a Doctor of Musical Arts as a performer, and you do recitals. So I always approached it as like part of performance and a study. So my playing, I got a lot from the solo Django from For Django, like the first song on that album I transcribed when I was in college, and I spent a lot of time working on that, and it really changed my technique. And there's certain passages in there that are really, I mean, it's all hard to play, but like thinking back, if I had known that that was how he played, I probably would have adapted it back then, but I didn't know. I was just like, okay, I was just an alternate picker at the time. I was like Pat Martino and those cats. I just tried to alternate pick everything. And so I learned a lot from that solo, and it improved my technique. But there's some spots that definitely it would have made sense to go da da da, because he doesn't go this way. Like he'll go across three strings, and clearly he's not sweeping up, because it sounds like da da da. And I think he's going, I mean, I know pretty much he's going da da da. He's using all down picks, and I would try to alternate and always mess it up. But yeah, I just, by the time I was doing this dissertation too, I mean, at a certain point, your technique is baked in. You can't, I mean, I can like try to work on it a little bit, but I couldn't totally change the way I do things. That would be too weird.
Yeah, I know. And then Steve and Hank,
Mhm.
they had their own techniques also.
Yeah, I mean, Steve said that he kind of picks like Joe Pass, but I think he just sort of did it intuitively. He said that he didn't, I don't think anyone really talked about it. Maybe they talked about the Django style, but back then, I don't know. I feel like jazz guitar technique is so, everyone does it differently. And I guess maybe it's like that with classical guitar. I don't know, but it seems to me like it's a little more standardized, different techniques. And you think of the great jazz guitar like plectrum players, George Benson, Martino, Pat Metheny. All these people have a very different way of doing it. And Steve, he's a shredding, picker, but he told me that he does kind of start with a down pick when he goes to a new string. But I
Yeah,
don't.
yeah. Do you want to you want to have maybe alguien tiene alguna pregunta hasta ahorita que quiera hacerle al doctor? ¿No? Tenemos poquito tiempo, pero como no hay luz, pues estaba pensando, pues no tardarnos tanto para no estar así oscuras, ¿no? Entonces, si alguien tiene una pregunta, pues de una vez.
No conozco mucho de la carrera de Yopas, pero me hizo interesante lo que me comentó, que trabajó mucho también en la escena como músico de producción. No sé, pues qué tanto a lo largo de su carrera eso le ayudó a sostener su carrera como intérprete de sus propias composiciones, o lo hacía más por otras razones.
Yeah. Yeah, he's asking like when he was a session musician, like how big was that part of his like as a musician income, or how busy was him on these studio records?
I mean, it sounds like from what I heard, so I talked to a guy named Mike Anthony who played sort of full time in the studios, like on movie soundtracks and things in the 60s and 70s. And I think as long as that lasted. And he told me that Joe Pass wasn't there as much as he wasn't like a regular because he would be touring with other people and he was still, making records. He had other projects, but I think that it was so lucrative. The money was really good at the time. And so I think it was just something he would do. I mean, part of the reason we don't know the 60s period is that he was doing a lot of different things. He wasn't like, he didn't have a manager, or I didn't hear about a manager. Whereas when Norman Granz came onto the scene, he basically just like took over every aspect of his career and got him well known by all, we're talking about him because of that. But, in my opinion, that's not to me, his best work is in the 60s artistically. So it was just part of what he was doing.
Yeah. You know what? I was remembering also the part where you talk about when he worked and collaborated with John Pisano.
Mm-hmm.
Like this was a long period of time, right? Like,
yeah,
very nice quotes there about. Did you interview John Pisano?
Yeah, that was funny. I called him up. I think I got his phone number, and I called him, and he picked up, and I was like, "Hey, Mr. Pisano, I'm doing this project, and I'm like, do you have any time to talk?" And he was like, "Yeah, I could give you 5 minutes." And I was like, 5 minutes? But then he talked to me for like half an hour before. I think he was kind of waiting to see like where I was coming from, and he probably gets people bothering him all the time about that. But they were, I think they were pretty much like best friends or very close friends. And it was funny. He told me too, like with For Django, which is, 2 guitars, bass, and drums. The album Joy Spring is the same band, but instead of guitar, there's a pianist, Mike Wolford, who I wasn't able to get in touch with, but he's still playing in San Diego. But Pisano said that on For Django, they actually rehearsed, which was like the only time they'd ever like, I think all those records he did, they would just show up and wing it and just make it up on the spot. But like they worked out guitar parts together, like on the opening Django song. But then he said that the engineer like recorded his part so low that you like barely hear it. The guitar part. But yeah, all the comping on that record is guitar. Pisano, he doesn't take any solos, but he's a great player too. I mean, he has a record. What is it called? Among Friends or something. I had this CD of him playing with duets with a lot of different people, and he takes his own solos, and he's just a great, great guitar player. Yeah. But that was kind of, the sound of, they wanted to pay tribute to Django Reinhardt, so they wanted the string band sound.
They would play a lot in the area, right? In Los Angeles.
I think so. I mean, there were some clubs. There was Guitar Night. I've got a whole. I was going today. There's a million little details in there that I looked up. Like
this part where they mentioned that Guitar Night. Actually, it stayed for a long time. Like
Pisano's Guitar Night. Yeah, Dante's.
Yeah, until recently, actually, like early 2000s.
Yeah.
Happening, I think, with John Pisano, and probably lately the one that was leading that probably is Bruce Forman.
Probably, yeah. I've never I don't spend much time in LA. I should have made a pilgrimage out there while I was doing this, but I was just trying to get it finished.
Yeah. It's interesting that there's probably all these people who played with him, and they're around still, like some of them.
Yeah, a lot of folks, he definitely had and like I said, I laser focused on that 1960s period, but I know that he was teaching out there in LA too, like later in his career. And I think he would spend some time in Germany and sometimes in the States. I didn't delve into that too much. That was just sort of stuff that I heard about. But maybe, something else to talk about. I mean, half of the book is the dissertation is talking about the history and the technique and the equipment and all that. And then the whole second half was kind of like trying to focus on musically, like what is it that sets apart this period of Joe Pass and makes it so special to me just from a musical standpoint. So I definitely tried to go through some of the musical techniques that he would use in this period, and also the elusive goal of I got it in my head that there's something, you know, like motivic going on in his solos, and that's always like a kind of difficult thing to nail down. And I really wish, I know looking back now, I really wish that before I wrote this dissertation, I had checked out the Benjamin Given article. I don't know if you all are familiar with that, called it's like Sonny Rollins, Gunther Schuller, and the Problem of Thematic Improvisation, which is such an amazing piece. And I think it had just been published, like when I was in the midst of this, and I was already like so deep into it that I didn't
Oh yeah.
aware of it. And it's just really cool because the thing that I you know, looking back on doing this big project, and the thing that I've used in the books that I have written since then and the teaching is more about so I distinguish between motives that last for the whole solo, like, okay, here's the first motive and it's here and it goes through the whole solo and he does this and he does that. I distinguish between that and the more localized development, or I called it question and answer. The idea that in his solos, you'll hear, you sort of hear him think. And he actually has a quote about it that I think is worth reading. Let's see, where is it? Page 103. I found it, so I would actually have something to show you. But and I first saw this in the liner notes of the live record, which are really great liner notes. Pete Welding is the guy's name who wrote the liner notes, and he was kind of inspired me a lot to do this. And I'll read you the quote if I can get it. I'm flipping through here. Let's see. Yeah, he says, this is Joe Pass. Actually, no, he said this, Joe Pass said this in 1975 to Downbeat magazine, and he says, this is the quote, "Everything has to roll and flow naturally, one thing after another in a row. If you take one thing out, you break the sequence, and then it doesn't come out right. But when everything is right in your head, and you're not influenced by anything artificial, then everything is right, and it comes out that way." And I thought that was such a very lucid description of when you're actually in the moment improvising. It's this idea of one idea leading to another in this logical, when everything is going right, it comes out later when you hear it back. You're like, oh, he must have meant to do that. It sounds like it's pre-planned, but it's not really.
Yeah.
And I also like, a funny thing is I had found these quotes from Arnold Schoenberg, this idea that he has in his, he has this collection of essays. Basically, he would just rant and rave a lot. It's fun if you read through this thing. It's called Style and Idea. And a lot of it is essays that he wrote, you know, saying bad things about people, or saying this person's great, this person's terrible, blah, blah, blah. But he says, he contrasts Wagner and Brahms, and he says that, this is Arnold Schoenberg, he says, in order to make his themes suitable for memorability, talking about Wagner, he had to use sequences and semi-sequences, unvaried or slightly varied repetitions differing in nothing essential from their first appearance, except that they're exactly transposed to other degrees. So he's saying Wagner would just take the same idea and like move it around, you know, like kill the rabbit, nah, nah, nah. Like the motives and something. Whereas he contrasted that with Brahms, who he says used repeated phrases, motives, and other structural ingredients of themes only in varied forms, if possible in the form of developing variation. So the idea that you're developing things, but not so literally. It's not like, here's the idea, and then you do it, which is, it's sort of ironic that Schoenberg would be saying this, because we think about 12 tone and the literal sort of interpretation of, it's like, okay, here it is, and now it's backwards, and now it's transposed and backwards, and now it's inverted. But he seems to be saying that, you know, the superior way to do it is to have the development to be more natural and be varied. And you think about, that's what I think is going on in the Joe Pass of the 60s, where one thing leads to another. And maybe, you know, looking back, the things that I identified as motives that happen over the whole solo, I think it's more that that's just like the stuff that he played in that period, because you hear him in every solo. But then again, you hear that in classical, like if you take a period of, I don't know, Beethoven or Mozart, it's not like every piece is totally different. It's all the same stuff anyway, like more or less, it's a little different, but it's not like every new piece is a completely different vocabulary. So anyway, that's what I think about these days when I look back on it. I think that, I definitely spent a lot of time identifying these things. I think the most worthwhile and valid analysis is just trying to identify where and how one idea leads to another, and just kind of point it out. And if you want, I could play, I queued up like what I think is maybe the best example of this.
Sure.
Yeah, so my favorite, I think too, the solo that really got me to do this project, one of my favorites, is the Relaxing at Camarillo solo. And there's an idea I talk about in whatever chapter it is in the book, where I keep calling it the book. I mean, it felt like a book. It's as long as a book. Where is it? Yeah, chapter 6, where I talk about the characteristics of his playing at the time. And I talk about, I identified it as motive 4 from Relaxing at Camarillo solo, where that happens throughout the whole solo. He keeps going back to it. It's like bum, 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 da, 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 bum, ba, da, and then he'll play some other stuff and he'll go back to it. But the thing is, he uses that in like almost every solo of the time, which I don't know if that makes it less, I don't know that just is what it is. But I'll just play a little bit of this solo, because I use this now when I try to describe to people like the sort of genius of Joe Pass in this period particularly, because he would do this in later, but not as much, So this is from the very beginning of the Relaxing at Camarillo solo. So hopefully y'all, let me know if you can hear this. Does that sound like something?
It sounded, but now it's cut.
Yeah, sorry, I was gonna leave back.
Okay.
This is the end of the melody, and I'll show you where the solo starts. So here's the solo. So that's just the first couple choruses, and that solo is like 18, 17 choruses long. But it's like everything is in there. And I use that also as an example when I'm talking about phrasing, like variety of phrase lengths and ways to phrase things. But like the first 4 ideas, he goes, ba, 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 da, da, ba, ba, da, ba, da, ba, 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 da, ba. Da, 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 da. So there's like a conversation going on. Somehow it's like he says something, and then this one is like, oh yeah, and this one's like, yeah. And then he follows that up with this really long, I think it's 9 bars of eighth notes, really long sort of bop thing. And then he goes to like this modal idea, and then he kind of comes back to the first idea a little bit, and he introduces that boom, 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 that if you listen to the whole solo, keeps coming back. And I'm just gonna play it one more time for you guys. Here it is. It's like, okay. Like that, what was that? That's just the most amazing extended bop line. And then this next phrase. Kind of like the beginning, shorter ideas. And it sounds so perfect. It sounds like it was thought out beforehand, but it definitely was not, you know, and the way the band responds, you're like, how did they? And that was just the level that he was improvising at that time period, and that's kind of like what got me hooked, and made me want to do the study.
The rhythm is so strong also, right? Like
Oh
just
yeah.
the melodic rhythm, even without notes, it could be like a drum solo easily.
Yeah, he's, you know, he was super swinging player, you know, and beautiful sound, like tone. That's the, you know, it's definitely with a pick, good pick sound. Yeah, everything about it is just like top shelf, as we say.
Yeah. What else conclusions did you have from the musical part? You know, like
Gosh, well, I differentiated. So the last chapter before the like appendices, because the appendices basically I have like 25 transcriptions with really extensive comment. I have charts and commentary. I went crazy with it. You know, I went down so far. I went so far down the rabbit hole I almost couldn't get back out. But in the text before the appendices, I tried to come up with some different categories of actual things that he would do. There's the motivic thing, but there's also, you know, I tried to talk a little bit about, you know, chord scale theory versus chromaticism. And I didn't really frame it as vocabulary necessarily. I was just trying to analyze, really like point out some of the chromatic ideas that he would use. I mean, like there's a lot of like da 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 da. He does that a lot. So as does Django Reinhardt, if you hear Django do that. Another thing is like over the bar line phrasing. And when I say that, I mean that can mean
yeah,
in the sense that progressions get extended into, so you're playing over a chord that's not really there anymore.
yeah.
And also just in general, like we just heard, I consider that really long line to be an over the bar line kind of phrase because of where it starts in the form. It goes over like the double bar line. It starts in like measure, I can't remember exactly. I'd have to listen again, but it doesn't follow the exact like 4/4 structure of the tune. And he always transcends, or often transcends, the form of the song with his lines and his phrasing. There's the blues tonality. Another thing that's really beautiful and that sets Joe Pass apart is the his ballad style at that period, and I have to kind of relate it to the Italian thing again, the Italian American, because there's like a cantabile sort of style if you listen to the way he phrases things on ballads. And I called it for lack of a better term, like the speed up, slow down technique. He gets this kind of rubato feel even when the band is playing. He doesn't just go da 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 da. It's like da 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 da, and it's always very lyrical. Like he really sells it to you, almost like it's a very vocal style. And you hear him talk in interviews about how when he was a kid, you know, the music teacher that would come to the house would, you know, he'd teach him a lesson and then he'd hang out with the dad and like drink wine and they'd be singing songs. And, you know, people would listen to like arias, you know, opera, Italian opera as kind of like popular music, you know, Italian immigrants at the time. So that was definitely, I feel like that's in there in his playing in a way that like you listen to Jimmy Rainey, who I love as well. And it's not that, you know, he doesn't have that sort of style. Neither does Tal Farlow. I mean, they have their own thing, which I love. With Joe Pass, there's something like, I think the musical term is, cantabile. It's always when he's playing those ballads, it has that style in there. And one other thing that, you know, I point out in the text, there's this narrative that Joe Pass was sort of old fashioned or whatever, or had one foot in the, because if you listen to the music of the 70s, I mean, it was kind of presented that way. It was always standards. It was always, the Great American Songbook, which I love, and the super groups that Norman Granz liked to put together. You know, it's always Dizzy's Big Four, Duke's Big Four, da da da. But if you listen to like on Catch Me, they do some Bill Evans songs. They're playing like Walking Up, and they recorded Periscope. It didn't go on the record, but they're playing and he has a lot of like modern harmony, a lot of quartal, like things in fourths, a lot of intervallic stuff that you hear, you're like, well, what was that? It's kind of like you wouldn't think. And it was very cutting edge. I mean, in 1963, playing a bunch of like Bill Evans tunes. I mean, Miles in '63, the Wayne Shorter band wasn't really even together. So like the cutting edge of jazz in the early '60s, they were very much doing that. But no one's ever heard those records. So there's this narrative of the past that's accurate.
It's kind of difficult actually still to get access to them, no? It's still on YouTube.
They're
Not really
weird. They're
find a lot.
packaged in a weird way. Like if you look up, like for instance, that when I try to go on, my Apple Music and see that Joy Spring, it comes up, it doesn't show me the album cover or anything. It's like the streaming services can be kind of weird with albums like that. But yeah, it's still a little bit, you have to really hunt down, even in this era, it's not, because nobody seems to care about
Did
it.
did you go to the libraries or where did you find all this material?
Luckily, so when I went through the Oishi discography, everything was on YouTube. It was amazing. 'Cause he would say the record, and I was like, man, I'm never gonna find this. This is gonna be impossible. And I would just start looking. I'd say like, okay, Gerald Wilson, Round Midnight, Pacific Jazz, boom, and it was there. And I don't know if he put them up there. Even like there's a recording of Joe Pass when he was like 15 with Tony Pastor. I wonder if I actually have this here. And I was like, there's no way. I think he sent it to me. Oishi, somebody did. It must have been him. But like check this out.
Now here comes a brand new tune coming up. Moving along.
This is 1947. Let's skip to the guitar. Okay. This is Joe Pass when he's like 14. It's
He's
19
kind of sounding like Charlie Christian,
Yeah.
but
More chops.
On a-
Django. It's like a Django, Charlie Christian, that real, like when Django played electric.
yeah.
It's 1947, so he would have been 16, something like that. And so I was able to track down some of it. People would send me things, and it's all out there. The truth is out there. You just have to
Yeah, right? You have to dig it.
weird stuff on YouTube though. Weird like records that he was on that Oishi documented, and I just would hunt them down, and I wrote like I listened to them all and wrote a little paragraph or something about them just to kind of say what was going on.
Yeah, now when you were talking about these melodic inflections he will do, like, and then I remember some introductions he does, like especially to ballads,
Mhm.
and these lines he play where he really outlines the harmony, but also this kind of dynamic rhythmically, like you say, he really sell it to you, like
Oh yeah.
you hear where's the melody going, like
Mhm.
even beforehand he finished, like it's somehow so natural that it sounds amazing.
Vocal. It's like la. There's this thing to it. Like here's a good example. Well, this is also my favorite solo guitar that he ever did. The intro to Nuage. But when he comes in with the band. See how it like speeds up and slows down? Da, da, da. Keeps coming back. Anyway, yeah, so it's like very in and out of time, and it gets quiet and it gets loud, and it really like has a vocal quality, I think.
Yeah, sounds amazing.
Mhm.
And it's really quite unknown. Yeah, kills.
Yeah. I mean, that's business. And one other thing, I don't know if we're going to run out of time, but I tried to trace the torture. There's one paragraph in the dissertation where part of the reason for this is that if you try to figure out what happened to just the catalog of Pacific Jazz, it's really complicated. Like it was Pacific Jazz and it was bought by Liberty Records, and then Liberty Records was bought by Blue Note, and then Blue Note was bought by this and that. And so the tortured history of like who owned these masters, and we're talking about some stuff that didn't make any money to anyone. And of course, artistic jazz is always sort of exists in this weird space where we're supposed to be like kind of competing with pop music, but it's artistic, and you know what I mean? So yeah, I tried to trace like why was it that like when I bought Joy Spring in 1995, the album was recorded in 1964. It was released in 1981 by Blue Note on LP, and it was like some reissue series, but it had never been issued. And then in 1995, it was put on CD, and it was still Blue Note, but I remember it says EMI at the bottom, because then by that point, EMI had bought Blue Note, and then EMI was bought by, I think, Universal Music. I forget the names of all the companies, but it just didn't. Whereas I think Pablo Records, and again, I didn't look into that as much, but it just seems like when I was a kid and I went to the record store, all the Pablo ones were there, always. And you'd go photo through, and you might find the only one that you could find from this period, this is like 1996 or something, was Joy Spring, because it had been reissued by Blue Note. But it's just like completely different Joe Pass than the one. And there's no way you were going to find For Django, Simplicity, Catch Me, Sounds of Cinnamon. No way. I had For Django on a cassette tape that Hank dubbed from his LP. And that's why I had this. I had this like crackly, like old record dubbed on a tape of Catch Me, some songs from Simplicity, and For Django. So it was also kind of, but that kind of made it more appealing too, because it was like a secret. The secret.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like some of those records were like that. You were like, oh my God, you've got that one. Whereas now, but that's why it's so weird. Even now, it's kind of hard to find when everything is supposed to be out there.
That's what's weird about it, because I mean, now I would expect to have an easier way to find them,
Mm-hmm.
but I think there are tens of records we don't know about, and
Jimmy
can
Rainey
find-
is worse. Jimmy Rainey is like, you can't, I mean, they're on YouTube because people will, but it's somebody just put it up there.
Yeah.
But there's all these Jimmy Rainey records that you can't find.
Yeah. Wow, man, thank you. It's been a very nice presentation from you. I'm gonna ask if there's any questions.
Sure. Yeah.
de- Alguien que quiera preguntar, comentar.
El audio en las bocinas.
Es que tenemos el concierto, ya hay luz, ¿no? Y tenemos concierto de la maestra Pamela y sí. Es que estaba el audio, pero como se fue la luz. Sí.
Bueno, y escuchando todo lo que dijo, pues, sí, se metió muy a fondo a todo el contexto de Joe Pass, ¿no? Todas las grabaciones, hasta su vida y todas sus etapas. ¿Qué tan importante habrá sido para él? O sea, pues tener todos esos datos biográficos para su investigación, y si comprendió algo, le enseñó algo a él, pues sí, todos esos datos, o sea, acerca de su manera de tocar y todo eso.
Ujú. Yeah, here's one question.
Mhm.
Saying, he's asking about how meaningful was this for your way of playing? All these when you went through, like, I think, how long were you researching? Like 3 years, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, to write this thing, I mean, first I did the transcriptions first, and some
Yeah.
of them, I didn't have to do all of them. Some of them I had done, others were already published, but they have mistakes, and I probably made mistakes too. It's really hard when you do 25 transcriptions to not mess something up. But I did that process and the analysis first, and that took about a year, because I was also working, playing gigs. I was back in New Orleans, but that took me a year. I probably could have done it faster, but I was, like I said, I was doing other things. And then the writing part, I remember I went kind of crazy and did it in 2 months. But that was 2 months, 8 hours a day. I would do 4 hours in the morning, and then I'd take a break, and then in the evening I would do another 4 hours. And so that was all just like in the library. Although a lot of the research was on the internet, so that made it faster. But all the writing part, like the first kind of 200 pages of the thing, was in about 2 months, and that includes like all going through it over and over again and going crazy and losing my mind. And at one point, I decided to go back through all the transcriptions and try to identify where he picked and where he didn't, and that was just crazy because you couldn't really, it was so hard to tell because the sound quality, I mean, on For Django you could tell, like on that one we were just hearing, but on Catch Me it's really difficult. And I would slow it down and I'm trying to hear, but then you hear all these other artifacts in the recording. But the whole process was about maybe like a year and a half, 2 years of actual just like work, not including the proposal. You have to do, there's a lot of sort of bureaucratic stuff you have to do, and the defense
Yeah, of course.
stuff.
Mm. There's another question.
Mhm.
Ah, what was the last one? Was it Nuach? The
The
last
last song was Nuage, yeah, from For Django.
Nuaches. Es nubes. Es una versión.
Was
De hecho,
Nuage.
es de Django Reinhardt. It's original from Django, right?
Yeah, it's a Django song that he recorded a bunch, and then that's the Joe Pass version.
De qué disco? From which record is it? It's for
For
Django.
Django. Para Django.
Para Django. For Django. El disco for Django.
That's his masterpiece, y'all. That is Joe Pass's magnum opus.
Es
You
la
heard it here. In my opinion, en mi opinión, es el mejor de Joe Pass.
Ahí está. Sí.
Bueno, yo quiero nada más dar un comentario que me parece que toda la investigación que has hecho es muy importante porque me recuerda en nuestra situación aquí en Chihuahua, cómo tenemos poetas y músicos de cantina y de calle que no hemos registrado nada de la historia y de su música, y que es muy importante hacer eso que tú estás haciendo con nuestra gente también. Y gracias por tu trabajo y gracias a Picasso por la improvisación que has hecho ahorita. No nos cortó la
Estuvimos
comunicación.
en Transilvania, ¿no?
Super.
We were on the horror house here.
Oh yeah. Oh, with the lights off. But no, it's funny, and I understood most of what you said, because with Joe Pass it's even weirder because he is super famous. I mean, he's a very famous person, but then there's this period, and a lot of it is a narrative I write about in there too. There's this kind of from the critics where they confuse the commercial success with the artistic thing, and they think, well, this didn't make his career, but it didn't, not because it wasn't artistically valid. It's because later he had like this marketing machine behind him of Norman Granz, and who was a multimillionaire, was buddies. The reason it's called Pablo Records is he was friends with Pablo Picasso. He had Oscar Peterson. I mean, he was a very wealthy guy, and he was great in a lot of ways. But so the Joe Pass, it's just hard for me because that music like is like my favorite stuff in the world on jazz guitar, and I play the way I play because of those records. And then I sort of perceive them as being unknown or even a little bit disrespected by the critics of like, oh, there was that other stuff, and then there was Virtuoso, and I'm like, Virtuoso's okay, but anyway. So it's just interesting have this earlier period of the person that is just still to this day a little bit underrated and unknown.
Great, thank you so much, Davey. We are very happy to have you here, and we wish you will come.
Oh man, how'd my boy Ryan do? Did he do his thing?
He did his thing. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, they both were great. Yeah, Ryan.
Did Will
And-
do it too?
Sorry,
Who else did one?
Andrew,
Andrew.
Ryan Peterson, and Andrew Gedman.
Oh, great! Wow.
Both. Andrew did his triad stuff
Yeah.
and superimposition stuff,
Yeah.
and also and Ryan also did the other thing he does.
The sus chords.
Yes,
Sus
Exactly.
triads.
yeah. So it's both section. It was very nice. Thank you so much for participating with us. I hope we keep cooperating and collaborating with you. And
Sure.
next time we're gonna come back. We're gonna come down there and hopefully we can have something happening in the future with our students and
Yeah,
also
for sure.
our teachers and our teachers. So thank you so much in
Thank you.
name of faculty and our university and our community. We look like a few, but we're very, very like
Strong.
into it. Yeah. Thank you so much, man.
Thanks,
We-
Roberto.
Un aplauso.
All right. Until next time.
Yeah. See you
Hasta la
soon.
próxima vez. Ciao.
Thank you. Ciao.